Hello guys and welcome back to another video. Today we'll be discussing some of the worst gadgets in the game. There are several gadgets in the game that feel like they really do anything useful at all, but today I'll be focusing in on 6 specific ones and proposing first a simple buff to potentially make them a viable option, and secondly a complete rework to either change how the gadget works or to replace it entirely. But to start off, we'll be having Emz's Asset Spray gadget. There are several gadgets in the game which allow a brawler's shot to go through walls just like this one, but all of those either do nothing to the brawler's main attack in cases such as Angelo and Mandy, or even give the main attack an extra effect in cases like Gray's Walking Cane. Asset Spray is the only one that actually nerfs how the brawler's attack damage works, which I assume is due to her being the only wall piercer who isn't a single target brawler. But if we ever want this gadget to be as good as her other one, which is pretty much needed into any form of aggression, we can't have this gadget actively make an already below average damage dealer even worse. So for the buff, I would simply take away the damage decrease. As for reworking the gadget, I would still take away the damage decrease, but additionally add a poison effect to where the brawler hit by this attack additionally takes 520 poison damage per second over 3 seconds. This poison would be the equivalent of another 1.5 tick of Emz's main attack, and in some cases will even allow you to take down some of the lower HP brawlers in the game through walls, as seen through this graph on screen right now. But moving on to our next brawler, and seeing as we mentioned Gray's Walking Cane, I feel it's only natural that we cover his other gadget now, Grand Piano. Looking at Grand Piano, if it was Gray's only gadget, it would actually be pretty usable. Opening up the map is pretty good, and in a lot of ways, it's just a worse version of Brock's rocket fuel. But that's not entirely a bad thing, as the same thing could be said for all dashes in the game, as they could be classified as just worse versions of Max's dash. The problem comes when we factor in Gray's other gadget, which not only allows his shot to pull opponents and go through walls, but also breaks the walls. Since this other gadget can pretty much do the same thing, although to a lesser extent, but also provides several other benefits, this gadget pretty much has no use. So for a buff, I could not think of anything that would compete with the versatility of his other gadget without making this one too toxic. So instead, I thought of just reworking it. That way, we can make this gadget just as versatile as this other one. Firstly, I want to play into the cartoony nature of this gadget. So first off, if an opponent is hit by this gadget, the piano, instead of falling straight down like usual, would now follow them before landing. The piano's travel speed will be the same movement speed as Bruce, Nita's Belle, so normal brawlers can outrun it, but slower ones like first stage Surge or 8-bit would not be able to do so. Additionally, after the piano falls, it creates a debris area for 4 seconds that slows the enemy and deals 580 damage a second to enemies in it. The 580 damage comes from Gray's main attack being split into the 4 potential seconds opponents could be trapped in the area, so that this gadget at max potential would deal 2,320 damage throughout that area, the same as his main attack. So now this gadget would have 3 different instances of dealing 2,320 damage when the opponent is first hit, when the opponent is hit by the piano, and when the opponent somehow stays in the debris area for all 4 seconds, giving this gadget a maximum potential of 6,960 damage. And although that is very well and unrealistic to do against the average brawler, it is guaranteed against the heist safe, and this rework added in with his new hypercharge might make him a top tier choice for heist, as with 4 potential gadget uses, Gray would now be able to deal 27,840 damage with just his gadgets, or just under 35% of the safe's health. All this still might not make it as good as Walking Cane, but it would definitely make it more viable in modes such as heist. But now on to our next brawler, and Max. As mentioned before, Max's phase shifter gadget could be considered the best dash gadget in the game. On the other hand, Sneaky Sneakers is just a unique idea performed very poorly. First off, once activated, you have no control over whether you get to teleport back or not. So small opponents a lot of the times won't even try shooting at you, but rather just pre-fire at where you activate the gadget at. Well, in that case, you would think just place the teleport in a safe spot, that way you don't have to worry about opponents shooting at you. Well, that activates this next problem with this gadget, only lasting 3 seconds. Additionally, it only refunds your health and not your ammo. So if you actually want to get value from this gadget, you pretty much have to wait until you get full ammo and health and a super so that you can put your gadget in a safe spot while having speed boost to get value out of all 3 seconds it is given to you. Overall, making the gadget very restrictive, limited, and highly telegraphed steal. So for my buff, I would firstly increase the gadget's duration from 3 seconds to 5 seconds. I feel like this would give it a good synergy with Max's hypercharge, as all hypercharges last 5 seconds. Since it is best used with a super, allowing her to one in with a hypercharge super and fight for the entire duration of her hypercharge, then teleport back, just seems to make more sense to me. Additionally, I would also allow the gadget to refund the same amount of ammo you had at the time of activation. On to how I would rework the gadget, but one of my main gripes again is the lack of a choice on whether or not you get to teleport back or not. So for my rework, I would make it so that you can only activate it when Max is in her super, and when pressed, it teleports Max back to where she was before she used her super. It however will only refund half the health and ammo you spent after activating the super. This will effectively make this gadget a get out of jail free card if you go in too aggressive with your super, but it is much more limited in when it can be used compared to a previous version. But now on to our next gadget, in Shade's jump scale gadget. There's not a lot I can say about this gadget besides it just sucks. It has a shorter range than his main attack, as his main attack has a 3.67 tile range, while jump scale only covers 3.33 tiles. So a lot of the times you're not even close enough to hit opponents with the slow unless you're directly on top of them. And when you actually do land it, a majority of the time, opponents would have died anyway because they are inside of Shade's radius. So I feel like a buff from 3.3 tiles to 6 tiles, the exact same radius as his circle, would be pretty good, but to avoid from making it be too toxic, I would decrease the slow from 4 seconds to 1.5 seconds. This is just a little shorter than Quo's gadget, but without the restriction of having to land a shot beforehand. As for a rework, I truly think Shade doesn't need a slow in his kit, but rather should play more into his gimmick of going through walls. So the new jump scale gadget will let Shade pass through walls for the next 3 seconds, basically giving him a mini version of his super, just without the speed boost. Our next gadget is one very dear to me, as it is for my favorite brawler, Doug, in his double sausage gadget. When compared to a gadget that is one of the 2 reasons why Doug is even usable, we can see where this one falls short. Doug's healing is already very minimal, so doubling it is not really going to be that impactful, especially since Doug already has a pretty decent reload speed, so most of the time you could just wait for one more basic attack and not have to waste a gadget. So when it comes to buffing this gadget, I would actually instead just buff Doug himself. I would increase his healing from 1200 to 1600, which at the same time would buff this gadget from 2400 healing to 3200 healing. This will allow for this gadget to heal just 200 more than a balance super, which I feel will at least make this gadget an option on more tanky teams. As for reworking it though, well, I think Doug just needs a rework in general, but for the gadget specifically, I would change it to be where instead for the next 5 seconds, all healing Doug does charges his super at a 1:6 ratio. So if you are healing both of your teammates and heal on all 3 of your shots, you would instantly charge your super. This is a bit more on the powerful side, but I think Doug definitely needs it. But now finally on to our last brawler with Larry and Laurie's auto swap gadget. This might possibly be the worst gadget in the entire game. After several nerfs to Laurie, this gadget, which was already the worst of the 2, also indirectly got nerfed. For one, swapping the main attack does not really change how Laurie will move. Ideally, you would want him to stay behind walls as he is a thrower, but most of the time he will still just run in and die despite being a thrower. Additionally, you are now forced to play at a closer range due to the taser being a close range weapon. And to add on to that, the damage you deal is very pitiful. So in my opinion, this might just be the only gadget in the game that outright makes you a worse character for using it. However, when it comes to the buffs, it's pretty hard to buff in its current form, as any buffs to the gun will also apply to Laurie. And as we saw before, it is incredibly toxic when the spawnable is able to deal a ton of damage. So just like Gray, I'll be skipping a potential buff, as I simply think this needs an outright rework. This is actually going to be my most in-depth rework for this video, so I will explain it in 3 different steps. Firstly, the gadget will now swap which twin you are controlling. One of my biggest gripes with this brawler has always been that it was marketed as 2, but you are only ever able to play as Larry. Now players will be able to play as Laurie as well, and when swapping, it will perform just like Lola's gadget or Willow's super, where you swap to the immediate place where your twin is at. This could potentially be seen as toxic, as now Larry's could just spawn in the super and then Gadget to be back up at full HP. But overall, this would be very unoptimal, as basically you would be using up a super and a gadget just to swap weapons and spawn in a low HP twin. On to the second step, I would now buff the range of the gun from 6.67 tiles to 7.67 tiles, and the damage of the gun from 300 a bullet to 500 a bullet. This all comes with a condition though. Whichever twin the player is not controlling would now deal 40% less damage. You can reference this chart for a more visual reference, but basically while playing Larry, everything would be the exact same besides Laurie now having a 1 tile longer range. I don't really think the twins needed a buff, but the gun is still pretty useless right now, so it's not going to change that much. However, when activating the gadget, you will now be playing as Laurie. Your gun would now deal 500 damage a bullet, but at the same time, your twin Larry would only deal 840 damage per shot with his thrower attacks. That's less damage than even a Melody basic attack, but with this rework, the bot would actually not run into the opponents and can be thought of as a moving penny turret. But now for the third and final change. On respawn, players will now come back as the same twin they were when they were taken down, which will make every gadget use and building up your super just that much more important with this brawler. So after all of this, do I think this gadget will be good? Probably not. I just think the thrower mode is so much better than being forced to play at a close range with a low HP brawler. At least in my eyes, this gadget will always be worse than the other one, but at least with this rework, it will actually be fun and usable. But that's about all I have for this video. Let me know down in the comments what you guys thought about these changes and what other gadgets I should change in the future, and what other type of videos you would like to see in the future. But yeah, thank you for your time.